Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we're diving into something kind of interesting. We're going to be looking at some online gaming forums. We're going on a quest to decode a listener request, one that's surprisingly, I don't know, complicated. Can you recommend some recent non-woke games?
Wow, yeah, it's like we've stumbled onto a cultural puzzle, right? This request kind of just opens up this Pandora's box of issues facing gaming today.
It's true. And, we've got this forum post. It's like our artifact, and we're trying to understand the culture that created it. The language itself is fascinating. Non-woke, it's like this cultural shorthand, isn't it?
Yeah, it really is. Almost like woke has become this weapon,
Yeah.
a way to quickly dismiss something without really addressing any of the concerns underneath.
Okay, so let's unpack that. What are those underlying concerns? What is it about forced diversity, feminism, even LGBTQ representation in games that's making some gamers avoid them?
Well, I think part of it might be this desire for, just pure escapism. You boot up a game because you want to slay dragons or explore space, not necessarily, confront complex social issues.
Yeah, I get that. Sometimes you just want to turn your brain off and escape into a fantasy world. But then again, haven't games always been full of social commentary? I mean, think about how popular dystopian worlds and alternate histories are. Those engage with social issues, even if it's not always so in your face.
Exactly. Which I think really makes you wonder, what's the line? When does social commentary enhance a game, and when does it feel like it's being forced, like our listener said?
All right, so how did other users react to this request? Was everyone on board with this non-woke quest?
Oh, the internet never disappoints when it comes to having a variety of opinions. We saw a whole bunch of responses, from people trying to help to some pretty sarcastic replies.
Like suggesting 8chan. I mean, for those who don't know, that's like the Wild West of online forums, Not exactly a place for nuanced social justice takes.
Exactly. Suggesting 8chan in this case isn't about recommending a game. It's more about how absurd this whole thing is, trying to label games with such broad strokes. It's a classic example of gatekeeping, where humor and sarcasm are used to kind of police what you can and can't talk about in a community.
So sarcasm, gatekeeping sounds about right for the internet. But were there actually any game recommendations that, fit what this listener was looking for?
Yeah, actually there were. And this is where it gets, kind of interesting. It shows how subjective these labels like woke can be.
Okay, I like where this is going.
Okay.
Give me an example. What did people consider non-woke?
Well, one game that kept coming up was Black Myth, Wukong.
Mm.
It's an action RPG based on Chinese mythology, which a lot of people see as like a safe space from modern political debates.
Right, Journey to the West, mythical creatures, not exactly hotbeds of social justice warriors. But it does make you wonder, are we missing out on some really cool stories by sticking to the same old safe settings? But getting back to this request, what about games that got, rejected?
This is where woke starts to get a little blurry. God of War Ragnarok, for example, the original poster wasn't into it.
Wait, really? I mean, yeah, it's Norse mythology, gods, monsters, that whole deal. But it also has these really interesting themes about fatherhood, redemption, going up against... And those themes woke?
Well, that's the million-dollar question, right?
Right.
Ragnarok doesn't scream like political game.
Ah.
It's a big action game with tons of combat. But the story, especially Kratos and Atreus' relationship, it touches on ideas of masculinity, trauma, how societies handle change, that kind of thing.
So maybe it's not about a game pushing an agenda, but more about players seeing their own experiences reflected in these themes, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's why this conversation is so difficult. You could have a developer just trying to make a good story, taking inspiration from wherever, and people might still interpret it through their own ideas about today's social issues.
Which leads to another question. Should we, as players, be able to demand games exclude certain themes or viewpoints?
It's a slippery slope, for sure. On the one hand, yeah, people want games they connect with, content that aligns with their values. But does that mean potentially limiting what stories get told? Silencing voices.
It's like that Neil Gaiman quote, if you don't see yourself represented, it's like you're being told you don't exist.
And that's a powerful statement, especially with how gaming has historically lacked diversity.
Mm-hmm.
For a long time, certain voices, certain experiences, they just weren't really present in mainstream games.
So is it possible that people calling stuff woke are just reacting to a perceived loss of control? Like gaming used to be this one thing, and now it's changing, becoming more diverse, more like the real world. That's a really interesting thing to think about.
Absolutely. And it speaks to this bigger shift, not just in games, but across all media. It's not just games, it's books, movies, even music. People want more say in the stories they consume, you know?
And that's not necessarily a bad thing, right? Curating what you consume, finding stories that resonate, that's empowering. But like you said, there's a balance. When does personal preference turn into censorship? Where do we draw the line?
Right. And who decides what's acceptable representation? Is it whoever shouts the loudest? Or is there a way to have these conversations, with nuance and respect?
It's like we're, I don't know, trying to solve a Rubik's Cube where the colors keep changing. Every time we think we understand non-woke, it becomes something else.
Yeah, and that's what's so interesting about this. This deep dive has really shown us how slippery language can be, how subjective art is. That whole creator-consumer relationship is always changing.
We started with this request for game recommendations, and now we're talking about representation, artistic freedom, how people talk online.
And it all comes back to that one word, woke. That's become such a loaded term. It's like this catch-all for all these anxieties about how society's changing, who gets to tell stories and whose experiences matter.
It really is like one man's trash. What one person sees as an agenda, another person sees as just reflecting the real world.
And that's what makes this so tough. How do we talk about these different views without just resorting to labels and gut reactions?
It's about recognizing that art can help us connect with each other. When we see stories that challenge us, that show us different perspectives, it helps us understand what it means to be human.
That's what we all want, right? Connection, belonging. Games can do that, like any art form. But we have to be open to new things, to feeling a little uncomfortable, to really looking at our own biases.
Yeah.
So, as we wrap up this non-woke gaming deep dive, it leaves us with a question for you, the listener. What do you want from games? Are they just an escape, a way to avoid the real world? Or can they also hold up a mirror to the world, showing us the good and the bad, making us think and connect with people who are different from us? It's something to think about maybe next time you're playing a game. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Check out the show notes for links to everything we talked about. And as always, keep exploring, keep asking questions, and keep the conversation going. Until next time.